think about it. Entire civilizations just teetering on the brink. You've got armies sweeping across the map, ancient powers dissolving, and it's all this massive disruption communities facing. Well, not just hardship, but the very real possibility of vanishing completely. Today, we're plunging into exactly that kind of period, the aftermath of the 13th century Mongol invasions. And for the Ismaili community, a religious minority already, let's say, viewed with suspicion, this era presented an existential crisis. Their survival really depended on a subtle, often concealed strategy.
Indeed. The Mongol conquests were catastrophic. There's no other word for it. And the Ismailis found themselves in an exceptionally vulnerable position.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we'll explore their methods, how they navigated this extreme danger, focusing primarily on this concept known as pious circumspection, or in Arabic, taqiyya.
Taqiyya, okay.
And, this wasn't simply about hiding your beliefs. It was much more calculated approach to preserving their identity when their very existence was on the line.
Exactly. We're looking at how a religious minority adapted, how they endured under just immense pressure. Our exploration today, it draws from an academic chapter that really meticulously analyzes this historical period and this Ismaili practice of taqiyya. And our goal for the learner is to grasp how this community not only survived, but, maintained its identity facing near annihilation. It offers potential insights, I think, into the dynamics of religious minorities and that fundamental human drive to persevere.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork. This historical context, the persecution, set the scene for us.
Well, the 13th century Mongol invasions unleashed this wave of intense hostility towards the Ismailis. It wasn't just, widespread destruction. It was the explicit calls for their eradication.
Really? Explicit calls?
Oh, yes. To illustrate just how stark this reality was, consider the words of Jalid Qaini. He was a Sunni scholar advising Sultan Shahrukh, this is in the 15th century. His recommendations were, they were brutal.
How so?
He urged the Sultan to, and I quote, slay them, attack them, and snatch the wealth from their hands. Their property and children are to be distributed as booty. May Almighty God abase them and curse them.
Wow, that's absolutely chilling.
The intensity is quite striking, isn't it?
And this animosity, it wasn't just limited to the Ismailis themselves, right?
No, absolutely not. Even Sunni individuals who advocated for maybe peaceful coexistence, they faced threats from figures like Kunin. He warned them they'd face the same dire consequences.
Unbelievable. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Kuni himself observed something specific, didn't he?
He did. He noticed that some individuals in Questan, they outwardly appeared as Sufis, but were, in reality, Ismailis.
Ah, okay.
And this provides us with early, quite concrete evidence of Ismailis utilizing taqiyya in this specific way, adopting a Sufi appearance.
That's fascinating, and it points to this closer relationship maybe between Ismailism and Sufism that was fostered by these pressures.
Exactly. They already shared a certain spiritual orientation, an emphasis on the inner, the esoteric, the Badin dimensions of religion, as opposed to just the purely literal outward expressions.
Right, the external.
Yeah. And Vladimir Ivanov, who was a prominent scholar of Ismaili literature, he pointed out that this extensive practice of taqiyya makes it remarkably challenging sometimes to distinguish between, quote, Ismailized Sufism and Sufisized Ismailism.
Wow. So the lines blurred significantly.
They really did. And this convergence, this blurring, it became a crucial survival strategy.
So let's dig deeper then into this central concept, taqiyya. You said it's more nuanced than just, pretending to be something you're not.
Precisely. The term taqiyya comes from Arabic roots that are associated with piety, devotion, reverence for God. But it also carries these meanings of preservation, protection, safeguarding.
Okay.
So while, yes, it involves a degree of concealment, it's fundamentally rooted in a sense of religious obligation and the sheer necessity of self-preservation in, perilous circumstances.
So pious circumspection is a better translation than just dissimulation.
Much better, I think. Dissimulation can imply a level of deceit that isn't necessarily inherent in taqiyya. The core idea here is that it's a religiously sanctioned form of cautious behavior when you're facing danger.
And this principle, taqiyya, it wasn't something the Ismailis just invented because of the Mongols, right? It has older roots.
Correct. The permissibility of using taqiyya under certain specific conditions, that's acknowledged across pretty much all branches of Islam. The Quran itself has relevant verses.
Like which ones?
Well, for instance, in Surah Al-Imran, that's 3.28, believers are advised against taking disbelievers as allies over other believers, except as a protective measure.
Okay, a pragmatic exception.
Exactly. And similarly, Surah Al-Nur, Qur'an 6.106, speaks of those who are compelled to utter disbelief while their hearts remain firm in faith. They're considered blameless.
And that's linked to a specific person, isn't it?
Yes, it's widely understood to refer to Ammar ibn Yasir, a companion of the Prophet. He endured torture and outwardly renounced his faith, but his inner belief, his heart, remained steadfast.
So a practice with really deep roots. But it seems the Shia community, because they were often a minority and faced persecution more consistently throughout history, they developed and used taqiyya more extensively.
Absolutely, that's a key point.
Yeah.
While Sunni Muslims might have occasionally used taqiyya, like during the Miona, which was a period of religious inquisition,
Right.
the ongoing vulnerability of the Shia made it almost a natural, sometimes necessary, mode of survival for them. They even developed a specific legal concept,
Dar al-Taqiyya.
Dar al-Taqiyya, yes, which translates roughly to the realm of pious circumspection. It refers to regions where practicing taqiyya was seen as obligatory because the dangers were just so prevalent.
Okay. And for the Shia, this practice wasn't just about hiding their general religious affiliation, was it? There were other layers.
Exactly. Shia taqiyya had at least two key dimensions. One was, yes, concealing their allegiance to the imams when openly declaring it would lead to persecution.
Makes sense.
But the other equally crucial aspect was safeguarding the imam's esoteric teachings, keeping them hidden from individuals who were seen as unprepared or maybe unworthy to receive that kind of profound knowledge.
So protecting the knowledge itself.
Precisely. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is quoted as saying, "Indeed, our affair, luster, is hidden, veiled by the covenant. Master, God will abase those who rend this veil from us."
The covenant. Nita.
Yes. So the core insight here isn't just about secrecy for secrecy's sake, but a deliberate safeguarding of profound teachings accessible only to those properly initiated.
This idea of a covenant and hidden sort of layered knowledge seems absolutely fundamental to their understanding.
It was central. Believers entered into this covenant, the mitak, which was also a pledge of allegiance, the bay'ah to the imam. And this included obligations not to divulge his teachings without authorization, and also not to seek guidance from those who weren't sanctioned by him.
Right, maintaining the integrity of the guidance.
Exactly. The imam himself described their teaching using very layered terms. The truth of the truth. It is the exoteric and the esoteric of the esoteric. It is the secret and the secret of a protected secret, hidden by a secret.
Wow, that really emphasizes the complexity, the depth.
It highlights this intricate understanding of knowledge within their tradition and the inherent need for discretion, for taqiyya, in transmitting it.
And we even have historical evidence, like letters from Fatimid caliphs giving guidance on this.
Yes, we do. Al-Qalqashandi, in his famous Manual for State Secretaries, he actually preserved a letter from a Fatimid caliph. It gives instructions to those authorized to initiate new members into the faith.
What did it say?
Well, the emphasis was on embodying piety, taqwa, justice, wisdom, and using gentle exhortation when inviting people. But importantly, the letter stressed getting that covenant, the mithaq, from new initiates, strengthening bonds with sincere believers, and critically guarding the mysteries of wisdom from those not ready for them.
So revealing secrets only to those who had proven their readiness.
Precisely. It underscores the deliberate, controlled nature of how knowledge was disseminated within the community.
And there was a prominent Ismaili scholar, Al-Mu'ayyad Filuddin Shirazi, who offered even deeper insights into taqiyya, didn't he?
Indeed. Al-Mu'ayyad, in his commentary on Quran Q1, he emphasized taqiyya as the very hallmark of the believers, al-Liman, and the garment of the folk of the invitation, al-Dawah.
It's a garment. That's a powerful image.
It is, and he even quoted Imam Jafar al-Sadiq stating unequivocally, "Taqiyya is my religion and the religion of my ancestors. Those who are not piously circumspect have no religion."
Wow. So that elevates it from just a tactic for survival to a core principle of their faith.
Absolutely, it becomes foundational.
Okay, so for the Nizari Ismaili specifically, especially after the devastating Mongol destruction of their main stronghold at Alamut in 1256, this need for taqiyya must have just skyrocketed.
Dramatically.
Right.
As a minority within a minority, deeply committed to the esoteric, the bone, the fall of Alamut ushered in an era where taqiyya wasn't just an occasional thing. It became an ingrained way of life, a necessity.
Right.
The Ismaili tradition recounts that the imam at the time, Shams al-Din Muhammad, he was the son of the last imam of Alamut. He was skillfully moved to safety.
Hidden away.
Exactly. And a later manuscript, from the 19th century actually, purports to record his own words. It details his travels in disguise across various lands, Iran, Turan, India, even parts of Europe.
And in these purported words, does he mention Taqiyya?
Explicitly. The manuscript quotes him stating, "In all these lands through which I traveled, in every place I practiced Taqiyya, because Taqiyya is my religion and the religion of my ancestors."
My religion and the religion of my ancestors, echoing Imam Jafar.
Precisely. And this ties into that well-known saying attributed to Imam Ali, that the earth is never without a proof of God, whether that proof is manifest or hidden.
So the Imam being hidden, Satra, explains why historical documentation from this period is limited.
Understandably, yes. This period of the Imam's concealment, or satra, meant less direct interaction that would leave obvious historical traces for outsiders.
But we do have some external accounts from non-Ismaili sources that seem to confirm this practice of concealment.
We do. Mustafi, writing in the 14th century, he observed that the people living in Taliqan outwardly professed Sunni Islam, but he noted they held inclinations toward Ismaili doctrines.
Interesting.
And Ghazan Khan, a Mongol ruler who later converted to Islam, he was also apparently aware that there were Ismailis concealing their true beliefs.
So it wasn't a total secret, at least not to everyone.
Not entirely, no. Furthermore, there's an early post-Alamut Ismaili text known as the Epistle of the Right Path. It specifically talks about this concept of satra, explaining that while the imams were hidden from the general populace, the religious hierarchy, the dawah, still maintained access to them.
So even when the imams were physically present and more visible, like back in Alamut, there was still this underlying instruction to practice taqiyya for security reasons.
Exactly. It wasn't just switched on after Alamut fell. Imam Gharib Mirza, a later Ismaili imam, even explicitly cautioned against uttering the imam's actual name in the presence of adversaries.
So how did they refer to the imams then for safety?
They used oblique references. Like Imam Jafar al-Idiq might be referred to simply as the man of knowledge. It was a protective measure.
That paints such a vivid picture, a community meticulously safeguarding its core beliefs, its leadership in this incredibly hostile environment. Which brings us, I think, to the vital role of that religious hierarchy during this long period of concealment.
Yes, absolutely crucial. When the imam was in Satr hidden, Ismaili tradition held that he remained accessible to the community. How? Through a structured religious hierarchy, particularly through the figure known as the proof, the dushat.
The thujet,
Okay,
the highest rank below the imam.
correct. There's an Ismaili text, the Paradise of Submission, which describes the ujat as the manifestation of the first intellect, acting as the imam's representative. It uses the analogy of the moon reflecting the sun's light when the imam, the sun, is physically absent or hidden.
So the thujet was this critical link connecting the hidden imam with the wider community. And we see echoes of this in poetry too, right? Like Nizari Quistani.
Yes, exactly. Nizari Quistani, the Ismaili poet from this period, he writes about finding the path to Ali's gate, meaning the imam, through the illuminating figure of Salman al-Farisi.
Salman al-Farisi.
In Ismaili thought, Salman holds this hugely significant symbolic position. He's seen as the archetypal gate, the bab, and the supreme proof, the pejat. So Nizari's poetry suggests that during Imam Shams al-Din Muhammad's time, communication and guidance likely flowed through these highly revered intermediary figures.
Right. And this understanding, it really challenges some earlier scholarly ideas, doesn't it? The idea that the Ismaili religious hierarchy just collapsed after the Mongols.
It does indeed. Newer manuscript discoveries offer evidence that religious instruction continued, that religious dues were still being collected within Ismaili communities, even in regions hit hard by the Mongol conquests.
So the organization persisted.
Yes. And the Ismaili perspective itself is that the religious organization, the Dawah, their mission and structure, actually becomes more active, more crucial during periods when the imam is in concealment or lacks political power.
More active when the imam is hidden. How so?
Because these figures within the Dawah, the hierarchy, they act as the guides, like the moon and the stars, precisely when the imam, the sun, is hidden from direct view. The historian Ibn Khaldun himself noted this resilience, this adaptability of the Ismaili Dawah.
Fascinating. So the transmission of their religious tradition then became even more critical in this pressured environment. How did Ismaili communities manage to keep their faith alive across generations under such intense scrutiny?
Well, a lot of it happened within families. Religious tradition was often passed down from parent to child, creating these pockets of preserved knowledge and practice.
Like Nizari Quistani mentioned his father.
Exactly. His poems express profound gratitude to his father for imparting religious instruction. It really underscores the vital role of that parental guidance in maintaining traditions.
But relying on taqiyyah like this, it must have carried risks too, like maybe blending in too well?
Absolutely. There was an inherent risk, the potential for genuine assimilation into the dominant Sunni community over time. Mustafa, the historian we mentioned, he observed exactly that in Rudbar.
Rudbar, which was historically an Ismaili stronghold.
Yes. He noted that many who outwardly identified as just generic Muslims, meaning non-Ismaili Muslims, had, by his time, actually become genuinely integrated into the surrounding Sunni population. The concealment had become permanent in a way.
And Nizar Quistani himself, he faced challenges maintaining his identity later in life, didn't he?
He did. He lamented the hostility he faced during his more advanced education, which was such a stark contrast to the religious nurturing he got within his family. He was even accused of heresy, of heterodoxy, and felt he had to defend his beliefs in his poetry.
Which brings us back to that idea of Sufism maybe serving as a kind of cloak for Ismaili beliefs and practices.
Yes, and Khomeini certainly noticed that outward Sufi appearance among some Ismailis in Quistan.
Right.
But it's important to understand this wasn't necessarily always a conscious, deliberate act of deception, like putting on a costume. It often reflected a shared intellectual landscape.
Oh, so?
Well, both Sufism and Ismailism, and Shi'ism more broadly, placed a significant emphasis on the esoteric, the bon. They shared that inward focus. Ibn Khaldun even noted that the Sufis in Iraq seemed to adopt their understanding of exoteric and esoteric meanings from the Ismaili Shia.
So there was already a lot of overlap and maybe cross-pollination of ideas.
Definitely. And Persian poetry, with its incredibly rich mystical tradition, became a key vehicle for this cultural exchange, a way to convey esoteric wisdom.
Poetry as a carrier.
Absolutely. The scholar Wheeler Thaxton pointed out that by Nizari's time, the very vocabulary of Persian poetry was just deeply infused with mystical undertones.
So Nizari using Sufi themes, it might have just been the natural language to use?
It could well have been, as much a reflection of the prevailing artistic and intellectual norms of his time as a conscious effort to conceal his specific Ismaili beliefs. You see early examples of this with figures like Tiakum Sana, revered poets claimed by both Sufis and Ismailis.
Right.
And you see shared symbolic language in early Ismaili poetic works too, like the Poems of the Resurrection from the Alamut period. So the connection was deep and long-standing.
Okay. Now, as time went on, after the initial Mongol shockwaves, the broader religious landscape started shifting again, didn't it? And we see Ismailis adapting in a slightly different way.
Yes, that's right. Following the main Mongol period, as reverence for Ali and the subsequent Shia Imams gained wider acceptance across the region, we start to observe Ismailis increasingly adopting the outward practices associated with what would later fully become Twelver Shi'ism.
So shifting from a Sunni outward appearance to more of a Twelver Shi one.
Generally speaking, yes. Instead of blending in with Sunnism, the rising tide of Alid devotion made aligning outwardly with Twelver practices a more viable, maybe safer, form of Taqiyya in many areas.
And as David Morgan notes, reverence for Ali wasn't always seen as strictly incompatible with Sunnism back then anyway.
Exactly. At that specific time, reverence for Ali could still fit within a broadly acceptable Sunni framework for many, which likely made this outward alignment easier.
But this adaptation, aligning outwardly with Twelver Shi'ism, it also presented its own unique challenges and internal distinctions for Ismailis, right? We see this in texts like the Councils of Chivalry.
Precisely. That text, the Councils of Chivalry, which was composed right around the time the Safavid dynasty was rising, it strongly emphasizes the ongoing presence, the athir, of the Ismaili Imam.
Which is a key difference from Twelver belief.
A fundamental difference. Twelver Shi'ism holds that the 12th Imam is in occultation go'ib. So the Councils contains quite sharp critiques of those who accept the Imam's occultation. It warns against blindly following oppressive exoteric religious authorities who deny access to the living, present Imam.
So even while adopting some Twelver practices outwardly for safety, they were internally reinforcing their core theological difference about the Imam's status present versus hidden.
Absolutely. Maintaining that crucial distinction was paramount. And their internal religious life, their community structures, they clearly continued.
How do we know that?
Well, the Councils of Chivalry itself mentions the regular gatherings, the majlises, held within the Ismaili community. These were dedicated to religious instruction and the discussion of esoteric doctrines.
So internal education continued.
Yes. It demonstrates that while Taqiyya provided that necessary external shield, The underlying Daiwa organization, the internal structure, remained active. It was preserving their distinct identity and providing ongoing religious guidance and edification for the community members.
It's really a compelling story, isn't it? Resilience, adaptation, survival against just immense adversity. So let's try and wrap this up, reflecting on the enduring significance of Taqiyya for this community's survival and continuity.
Yeah, to bring our discussion to a close, maybe let's revisit that profound statement from the Fayed scholar Alamu Ayad Fildin Shirazi. He observed that, quote, abundant prayer throughout the night beautifies the face come daytime.
How does that connect here?
Well, in the context of taqiyyah, practiced during those long periods of darkness and oppression, you can interpret it metaphorically, right? The hidden piety, the careful circumspection maintained during times of hardship. It ultimately ennobles the souls of the believers. It ensures the continuity of their spiritual tradition, ready to, perhaps, shine forth again when the daytime comes.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So the Ismailis navigated centuries of intense pressure through this whole toolkit of strategies, concealing the imam, effectively using their religious hierarchy, passing down traditions within families, skillfully employing the language of Sufism, adapting to that shifting landscape by aligning with Allah devotion. And at the heart of it all was taqiyya, this principle of pious circumspection, prudence, God-fearingness. It proved absolutely crucial for their remarkable endurance in what was, for long stretches, a consistently hostile world.
It really did. And this deep dive into the Ismaili experience, particularly after the Mongol invasions, it provides such a powerful testament, I think, to the enduring strength of hidden resilience.
Yeah.
It really prompts us to consider, doesn't it? In our contemporary world, where information and identity are so readily available, often so public, what profound lessons can we actually glean from a community that thrived, that endured for centuries, by carefully, deliberately safeguarding its deepest beliefs and practices?
A truly thought-provoking question to ponder the learner. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.